As we edge closer to the 2018 national election, political parties continue to fiercely campaign on their issues, hoping to convince people as to why they should form the next government. Tonight we speak with the FijiFirst party, and representing them is the party General Secretary, Mr. Ayaz Syed Qayyum. Sir, good evening and welcome to For the Record.
Thank you.
So you've started your campaign trail, you've had your family fun days, but to the people of Fiji, why should anyone vote for FijiFirst again? Or for someone who didn't vote for you in 2014, why should they vote for you this time around?
Well, there are a number of reasons, of course, and one of them, of course, the primary reason is that we have very strong and decisive leadership in our leader, Josiah Vorange Bainimarama. He has proven both through the Bainimarama government and, of course, the FijiFirst government that he is not hesitant to make tough decisions, to make tough calls, but also looks, into the future, has a plan. We launched a 20-year plan, a 5-year plan, development plan that's actually been received huge accolades from our development partners. We of course have, in terms of socio-economic rights and in fact the development policies, we've actually implemented them. We actually walk the talk, as they say. We have created a very modern society, and of course there's ample opportunity to do a lot more. And there is a momentum, there's a particular momentum, and we should not actually stray away from that momentum. That's the basic message of FijiFirst. We need that continuity, because with that continuity you get a continuation of that leadership, you get a continuity of stability, you actually have security, and of course it's premised all by the fundamental philosophical basis of any modern nation state, and that is having common and equal citizenry. You must have common and equal citizenry, so every single citizen feels that they can participate in the public space equally. It does not in any way negate the specific rights, for example in Fiji's case, of indigenous rights vis-a-vis land rights, vis-a-vis the ability to practice one's culture, practice one's religion. All of that constitution provisions are all there, all those constitutional provisions are there. So the fundamental premise is there, and also you have a party that actually believes in it, wants to implement it, does not, for example, go around 1 minute saying we'll have quota system, we'll bring back scholarships, for example, in ethnicity or province and what have you. Because you see, if you look at Fiji's history, it's been unfortunately, stabbed, I would say, continuously through that type of divisive politics, whether it's been provincialism, whether it's been based on ethnicity or religion, etc. So this election, from one perspective, is actually a very decisive election. And the reason why it's decisive is because this election will decide whether we go forward into the future on a very sure platform, or you're going to go backwards. And FijiFirst offers you a way forward.
Speaking of moving forward, apart from common citizenry, what other highlights would you say that the FijiFirst government has achieved in the past 4 years? Well,
common citizenry is not the only highlight. Common citizenry is actually given by the Constitution itself. But what I'm saying about common equal citizenry is we actually implement it. We believe in it. The development policies and its actual practical implementation is for all to see. Today now we have the highest rate of since 2007, if you want to go back to then. We have invested over $7 billion in infrastructure alone. They invested $3.5 billion in the 24 years preceding that. So the level of connectivity to water, roads, electricity, the fact that you have free education, early childhood, primary school, secondary school, access to universities through scholarships and through TELS program. I mean, all of this have been implemented. And the list simply just goes on. The fact that we have women empowerment, whether it's the Domestic Violence Act, whether we have the Child Protection Act, whether we have recognition of de facto relationships in FNPF, in the Family Law Act, right from corporatization, the laws pertaining to companies, all of that modernity has taken place both in laws and also in terms of practical application and implementation. The fact that telecommunications now is so easily accessible. A lot of people don't know this, in particular young people don't know this. In 2008, 2009, very few people had mobile phones. Unit cost of a mobile phone in a peak period is 99 cents a unit. Today it's about 23, 24 cents a unit. You have 5 up, 7 up, 10 up, all those sorts of things. That never used to happen before.
So when any government enters parliament, they of course must have a 4-year plan. So if I asked you 4 years ago what your 4-year plan was, do you think in retrospect you've been able to achieve all the things that you planned 4 years ago?
This government, led by our Prime Minister, has actually implemented a 20-year plan. You cannot run a country in this 21st century by having only a 4-year plan. We have a 20-year plan. We have a 5-year plan, a development plan that's open, that's transparent. It takes account of the fact that demographics in Fiji has changed. You know, we have today 50% of the population below the age of 27. 70% of the population is below the age of 40. So you need to have a policy that actually caters for that changing demographic, the urbanization, the fact that you have rural-urban drift. But on the other hand, we're also trying to reverse the rural-urban drift by making rural areas a lot more attractive. Very basic things like connectivity to water, electricity, by having streetlights in rural areas, by making farming attractive, by making 99-year leases available for agricultural purposes, will mean more people actually get into, into the agricultural sector. So we have actually done quite a number of substantial things through the 5 and 20-year plan. We don't simply have a 4-year plan. And the people, Fijian people must understand that a lot of these political parties who are coming along, they're only talking about, thinking up to their noses. They should not only think about a 4-year plan, we need to think about a 20-year plan.
Well, looking at long-term plans, what are some of the things that the FijiFirst government would like to continue on with, and what are some of the things that are high priority right now?
Well, we are essentially, the priority is the realization of the socio-economic rights and, of course, the civil political rights. They are there. The realization of socio-economic rights of our people. It's building upon the foundation that's already been put in place, but also being creative, being innovative, working smarter. I mean, for example, I'll give you a simple example. We started off, this is the only government that actually thought about people who don't have FNPF and when they get old, put simply. We know there are literally hundreds of thousands of people in Fiji who've never worked for anybody. People who live in villages, people who live in rural areas, people who are farmers, may have a dalo farm, cassava farm, planting vegetables like sugarcane farmers, people living in the maritime areas. They eke out their own living through farming methods. Now, when they get old, because they have not worked for anybody, they actually don't have superannuation. We have a lot of women in Fiji work for what we call house girls, as house girls. They don't have any FNPF. They never had FNPF. Now, when they get old, they don't have any pension. We started off by saying those people who are 70 years old will give you $30 a month. Then we brought it down to 68. We gave $50. Now we brought it down to 65 and giving $100. Now, that level of compassion is also necessary, but also smart, working smart. We've now insured them. So in the event, for example, them, not only them, but people who receive, say, social welfare benefits, a disabled person, other people. If, for example, their house catches on fire, we have a $3,000 insurance package for them. So we're building upon this, we're being smarter and building upon the foundations we've already established.
Okay, so with all of that that's happened, you've made, the FijiFirst government has made great strides in terms of progress, but what have been some of the obstacles along the way?
Well, I think, obstacles are always the fact that we have to play catch-up. The reality is that many of the things that FijiFirst has been doing should have been done 20, 30 years ago. Very basic things. There are people who are drinking from creeks and wells with frogs in it. There are far less people doing that. A lot more people are now connected, either on standalone systems or they're part of the reticulated water system. A lot more we have to do. But if we had more people connected to electricity and water and having good roads, then it would have been a lot easier to get into the more what we call the secondary stage. So, for example, in this year's budget, we are spending $50 million in rural electrification. So those are the areas. Of course, the other one is the improvement of the civil service. We need to have a cadre of civil servants that are appointed on merit, civil servants who are actually responsive to members of the public. That's why they're called public servants. They're supposed to be the servants of the public.
On that note, we'd like to touch on the civil service reforms that have happened, but something that's a bit of a burning issue with some Fijians out there. They seem to have this idea that FijiFirst is a two-man team. It's just you and the party leader, Frank Bainimarama. Is that true?
I don't know how is that related to public servants, but the public servants are different to politicians. Excuse me. But look, every party has a leader. Now, this is being personalized. And if I turn around and say, well, who's running Sodelpa? Who's running Labour Party? I mean, Mahendra Chaudhry's been there for donkey's years. Is anybody saying it's a one-man show? He's got a parliamentary leader now, and he's the leader outside. I mean, you know, Aman Ravindra Singh is the supposedly the parliamentary leader if he gets into parliament, and then you have a leader outside. See, this is all personalization. The reality is that we have a very strong and decisive leader who makes good decisions. So the idea is that they do not have any policies as such. They don't have any policies to substantially counteract what the Honorable Prime Minister has done. So they're trying to personalize it. So, oh, Benny Marama, you know, is the one who only leads it, and Benny Marama and Syed Qayyum are the only ones who run the party.
But tell us about the relationship that you and the Prime Minister have, because a lot of people love to talk about you two, and a lot of things have been said, including one of the most famous allegations is that you are running government and the Prime Minister is just a figurehead. I mean, you must be familiar with that criticism.
Look, again, you know, it's personalization. I mean, I can make many allegations about many other political parties. The reality is that if it wasn't for Josiah Vorenge and Benny Marama, we would not be here today. He's the man who's provided the leadership. He's the man with the vision. He's the one who's implementing it. There are many political parties that have, you know, leaders working in collaboration with other ministers. He has a very good relationship with all the other ministers in government. It's again been personalized because, you know, some people see me as an Indo-Fijian. Some people now, of course, as you know, the whole sort of religious vilification issue. I mean, some people have said that PM has become a Muslim because of me.
Right.
I mean, what utter nonsense. I mean, they've got nothing substantive to go on.
So in a nutshell,
so
would
this
you
is one
agree?
of the Sodelpa candidates who's actually said it on his Facebook page.
So in a nutshell, would you say that it's a case of good partnership between the two of you, and not one is a figurehead and one is being fed something else?
Look, anybody who understands the machinations of government would realize that the Prime Minister is the Prime Minister. He's the one who leads the country. He's the one who makes the decisions. If a minister, including myself, provides support to him, it does not mean that the minister is controlling government. We all have a very good relationship with him. Of course I have a very good relationship with the Honourable Prime Minister, but he's the one who calls the shots. It's very easy to do that. You see, the reason why people are saying that is because of the fact they want to, you know, put into people's minds to say, hey, you know, maybe this Indo-Fijian is the one turning the key. Go to somewhere, maybe this Muslim is turning the key. That's what it's all about. What people should be looking at. What are the results on the ground? Nobody's talking about the results on the ground. These people who talk about, you know, PM and I being together, or you know, one is controlling the other one, or whatever the case may be, what are the results? The Fijian people need to think about the elections in a way that they need to think about the future. They need to remove the personalization. They need to look at what has Josiah Vorenge, Benny Marama delivered. What has the FijiFirst government delivered?
Thank
Has
you for that.
any other government done what they have done? What he has done?
Thank you, Mr. King. So in the last segment, we were speaking about your relationship with the Prime Minister. But what was it in the first place that prompted you to work with him and form the FijiFirst Party? So what ideals did you see in him? And in 2018, when you're heading into your second election, are those ideals, in your opinion, still present in FijiFirst?
He's a man of vision. He's a man who is a very inclusive leader. He's also a leader who's very compassionate. He does not provide lip service. He actually, what he says, you know, is what he believes in. If he's going to sit here with you, he's not going to spin a story just because you are somebody, whoever you are. And then he'll spin another story because he's sitting with her. What he says to you is what he believes in, and what he say exactly the same thing to you, irrespective of your position in society. So you see, this is the kind of leadership we want and we need, and that's the attraction about him. I mean, I personally believe that he's a man not just of vision but guts. He's got the audacity and has had the audacity to challenge many of the establishments within Fiji. There are many different power nexuses within the Fijian political space, many. There are people, of course, in the private sector who have their own little clique, and they had a very unholy alliance between themselves and some of the politicians. You have the elite groups within the political field. There are others on the fringes, of course. Now, you see, he's been able to actually challenge them, but for the betterment of the country. And he said to everybody, look, we can all function in Fiji, but everybody will be treated equally. The law must apply equally to everybody. So you don't, just because you are some business person, it doesn't mean because you curry favor with some politician, you'll get all the preferential concessional entry into the country. We've never done that. So we create a level playing field that leads a lot of confidence. Now I can tell you what, it's because of him we now actually see a reversal. A lot of former Fijians who left Fiji because they felt dissatisfied with the political and socio-economic setup in Fiji are actually returning. We've opened up the dual citizenship, multiple citizenship. They're actually returning because they feel confident. They're returning to the country of their birth, and they want to invest.
All right, so we'll move on to your candidates. You have all 51 of your candidates ready, and we'd just like to talk about the process that you undertook in selecting these candidates.
So despite the fact that one of your candidates was disqualified, you of course fielded full 51 and the numbers have been allocated to them. I was just wondering, what process did you undertake to select your candidates?
People applied, and then we vetted them, vetted the application, and then we interviewed people. Then of course it goes through the party machinations, and then the leader decides.
Well, I mean, the reason why I guess that question is being asked is because we've spoken with other political parties who have a very, in my opinion, it's a strange way, because if a board decides and not the leader, you don't necessarily end up with the candidates that you want in your party, right? One of the prominent political parties has that system or has that management. What would you say about that?
Look, it's not my place to comment on what other political parties do. They have their own peculiarities, and let them be as they are. I mean, they need to deal with it. Well, our system is that we have the leader who ultimately makes the call. There's a vetting process. We have an interview panel, and people get vetted. There's certain criteria against which they are marked against or assessed against. And then, of course, the leader makes the call.
Bring it back to FijiFirst and how the candidates were selected, like you just talked about the vetting process. There's word on the street amongst people, certain sects, saying that it is now become a popularity contest instead of a credible election, saying that candidates nowadays are being chosen just because of how famous they are or how much reach they have within the populace right now, and not based on merit. What do you say to that?
Well, that's, I think, is true for many other political parties, but not for us. We have appointed people on merit. If you look at all our candidates, they all bring a particular skill set. And when we have assessed the candidates that have been selected, we look at their ability to contribute when in parliament. You see, whether they can actually stand up and speak, whether they have new ideas, whether they can actually sit in the committees and actually make a contribution. Of course, not everybody can be a minister. But the parliamentary committee system is very, very important. There are public hearings, they can summon people, the judicial type of appointments they can summon people in. So we've looked at those people based on that. And so they all bring different skill sets. I mean, I assume that you're talking about people perhaps who have been, in participating in things like Miss Hibiscus. That's certainly not our case. I mean, Anne Dunn, if you're referring to her,
well, I'm not referring to anyone.
No, but I mean, you're saying about beauty contests. It's got nothing to do with that. The reality is that, she was at COP23. She's a very strong advocate on climate change. So most certainly our candidates have been selected on their personal merit. I can tell you that many political parties have selected people because they're very well known in that particular area, and they're very good at swiping the grog. I can tell you, there are people, you open the can of worms, let's do that. We had somebody who applied with us, a candidate, who has got some Facebook, called Grog Masters. He applied, and of course, we quoted us and called me to Kirtan nights and all of this to say, we've got all the support and come, and we believe in the values of FijiFirst, etc. When he did not get selected, then we said, look, we still want to work with you. Every single applicant that applied received a personalized letter that was signed by our leader, talking about them not being selected. When he asked, he was not selected, we said we will look forward to coming down to he's from the Latoka, working with you. Went quiet. 3 days later, he's photographed with Bhiman Prasad and saying, this is the greatest leader ever Fiji has had. He is now a member of NFP lineup. You see, so there are people, for example, who want to enter parliament for their own personal aggrandizement, right? Because they can go to parliament. not necessarily a subscription to a belief in a particular principle or values of a particular political party. And we, of course, make sure that we do not get people like that.
Well, you said about you said opening up a can of worms. How about bringing it back to you, since we have you on the show today? People jokingly call you the minister for everything, saying that you have so many portfolios, multiple portfolios, and that you get paid for each one of them, and that you're raking in quite a lot of money on that. On today's show, would
money
you like
that
to
you store in
clarify?
your overseas bank account.
Well, we'll get to
Right,
that
we'll
later.
get to that.
But talking about all these portfolios, do you or do you not receive pay for each one of the ministerial positions you hold?
Okay, if you, as a host of the show, I would assume before you call somebody in, you do your research.
Well, just to
Let me
clarify.
finish. Let me finish. And if you saw my asset liability declaration, which was recently done, you would see my income level. I get paid one salary. You should have done your research rather than sort of speculating on something on Facebook. I get paid one salary, irrespective of the portfolios I have. Now, one thing is very interesting. You have other ministers that hold a number of portfolios. You have Minister of Agriculture, he's Minister for Provincial Development Maritime areas, he's also Minister for Natural Disaster Management, he's also Minister for Meteorological Services. Then you had Honorable Minister Praveen Bala, who was Minister for, at one stage, Minister for Environment, Local Government, Housing, Transport, I mean a number of other portfolios, indirectly. Now, and they are what I call very high levels of public contact. The ministries that I have, for example, civil service, communications, public service communications, public enterprise, and the AG's office, does not have that high level of contact with public. So it's more to do with strategic thinking as opposed to having high levels of public contact. The Minister of Infrastructure has got high levels of public contact. High levels of public contact as Minister for Local Government. High levels of public contact in respect of some of the other transportation matters. But you see, again, it's been all personalized. So, you have to look at it that way. Because as Minister of Public Enterprise, it's more to do with governance. All the different public enterprises operate on their own. I don't operate those companies. They have their own boards, they have their own CEOs, they have their own staff. So people need to think, you see, even as you as a journalist, you need to think along those lines before you actually start making this kind of questions. I mean, I know you're probably looking at Facebook or whatever, but you need to actually, apply your intellect to it too, because, people need to think about it. We cannot, you see, we need to move away as a society. Just because you read something on social media, pick up something on the street, and you start running along with it. I mean, it's the same way when we had the our family fun day in Nasori at Syria Park. This lady, this poor lady, came to me, and she said to me, she said, is Kandavu being taken over by the Chinese? And I laughed, and I said, no, of course not. And he said, Sandina, are you telling the truth? And I said, yes, and I actually explained to her. Now, you see, this is the kind of nonsense that anybody who has a ounce of understanding of governance and loans, etc., would know that is not possible. You cannot sell your country to a part of your country to another country.
Right.
It's impossible to do that,
Well,
legally speaking. No, but the point is that's being spun. So this is what we're encountering in this election, the same way that you are talking about these sorts of things. If somebody with half a sort of time that they would spend in perhaps doing other things, if they actually applied and said, look, rationally it cannot happen. Oh, this guy made a declaration. Declaration shows only one salary. No, people, and I think as journalists you have the responsibility to be able to actually put that out yourself. You don't have to do, he said that, she said that, he said that, she said that. You actually need to apply your own intellect and do your own analysis.
Okay, but what about looking forward?
For a lot of people, it's easier to discern that sort of information for someone who is aware of the facts. But if it's an ordinary person who has access to the internet, and if they see that for the past 4 years consistently someone's been writing that, I mean, when someone repeats a lie over and over again, it just becomes believable, even though that person isn't necessarily introducing any new evidence to support the case. They're just saying it again and again and again. Have these allegations gained traction? Is it affecting FijiFirst? Are people believing?
I really don't know, but all I know is that a lot of lies are being told. And what we are telling the public is that, you need to actually look at the facts. In the same way, for example, you're saying they've been consistently saying this. But on the other hand, there's actually hardcore evidence to show, publicly published, that I get only one salary. I do not know, by the way, that the show is all going to be about me. But the fact of the matter is that you've sort of made it a personal thing now. But the evidence is there. It's published. The Electoral Commission, the Fijian Elections Office, gets to see the evidence. They actually verify the evidence. So you see, again, it's not about what people keep on repeating. I think it's also your responsibility as media to say, well, actually, hang on, what is being said is actually not true because here's the evidence. Now, I don't think there's enough of that being done. Of course, there are other organizations like Fiji Times that actually perpetuate, like the $100 million supposedly gone missing, despite the fact that the Permanent Secretary for Economy has clarified it, despite the fact that the Auditor General's Office has clarified it, it continues to be spun. So this is getting back to the elections for the purpose of this interview. This is the challenge we have. And we are hoping that the Fijian public will see that, and they should see, when political parties come to campaign, they should talk about hardcore evidence, about facts. They should talk about their program, about their plan. What do they want to do? How will they do things differently to what the PM, our leader, is saying, to what FijiFirst is saying? We are telling people what we've done. We are saying what we are going to do. We are not spreading all this nonsense, these lies. And in fact, our Prime Minister made quite an emphatic statement. And frankly, I think he's not been given enough run by the media. I don't think there's ever been any political leader in Fijian political history post-independence that's made such an emphatic statement. When he announced his candidates, he actually made a fantastic statement talking about how he and his candidates, his provisional candidates at that point in time, will not campaign on lies. We'll campaign on truth. We'll campaign on a principled approach to things. I can tell you many things that some of these political parties are going now and saying to people, very parochial issues. I went to one place, we were in Korovuto last Sunday, and some people came to us.
Mr. Syed Qayyum, I hate to do this, but we'd like to continue this particular discussion after the break. So, Mr. Syed Qayyum, you were talking about the lies that were being perpetuated.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just about lies. It's also kind of about parochial issues. I mean, we were in Korovuto, and the Honourable Prime Minister made a statement, talked to everybody there, and mentioned about the fact that how one of the things that's really critically important is that we need to also focus on the fact that every individual citizen of this country needs to live with dignity, with respect. Now, we need to have that equality actually ingrained in our society, and do not, get swayed by parochial issues. And there's a gentleman who finished after that, after the meeting finished, sorry, I should say, and he came to me because, what you people said, what the PM said is exactly right. He said, I went to an NFP meeting. He said, I went to 2 of them. It was in that area, Korovuto area somewhere. And he said, they came at the meeting, and one of them took a photograph of, before he got to the meeting, of some cow eating somebody's sugarcane. He said, when you vote us in, we'll get rid of these cows. And people said, it's very good. He's going to get rid of the cows. But what will happen to the other policies? What are the other policies? We've had people telling us, look, we're not going to donate to your party. Some business people in Vanuatu who had individually contributed to the party last time. They said, because you've now put load restrictions on the trucks, LTA, because obviously we need to do that. If you go to Australia and New Zealand and you have a trucking business, you cannot carry any amount of load you want. There's a restriction. So because you people have done this, NFP has told us, one of their supporters or candidates has said that you vote us in, you can carry whatever load you want on your truck. You see, this is what's happening. So that person supposedly saying, okay, I can carry whatever load I want, so I'll vote for these people. Forget about how the scholarships will be given, forget about the tender process, forget about economic management. We've had 9 years of this economy growing straight. Hasn't happened before in Fijian history. 9 years straight of growth, projected to grow for another 3 years. And in fact, projections are generally done for 3 years. So, you see, this is the momentum. So what we're saying to members of the public, think about the fundamentals. If you look at most countries in the world that actually have done what we call have deep wealth, have done financially well over a number of decades and today are doing very reasonably well, they've actually had long periods of stability, long periods of consistency in policies. And that's very, very important. Even if you look at post-World War II Australia, you know, the great Australian dream, the realization of your one house with your Holden vehicle in the backyard and your Victor lawnmower, that all realized post-World War II in the 20 years led, Menzies-led government. And that's when you had the multinational corps coming in because you had consistency in policies. And that's precisely what we're telling the people of Fiji. We've never had this. Let's continue with this, because here you have a government, you have a caring leader, leaders not frightened to make tough decisions, ability to accept modernity. You now have people saying, we'll get rid of e-ticketing. We'll go back to all those, you know, good old days. We'll go back to multi-ethnic scholarships. How will they then give scholarships?
We'd like to get into more of your economic policies, but before that, something that's becoming increasingly relevant this time around, as it was in 2014, the anti-Muslim sentiment in Fiji. It's being discussed in a lot of spheres. There are reports coming out that political parties are perpetuating the idea, and it was an issue in the last election as well. So why do you think this is happening, and who is behind it?
You see, again, you know, we've seen this happen throughout our history. Traditionally, it's been, you know, Indo-Fijians versus Itauke people, kind of that whole pitch, you know, right from the alliance government days. Of course, Rambuka institutionalized it with these two coups. His entire justification of the two coups in '87 was that of the Indian takeover. Again, of course, you know, you had 2000, you had George Speight saying, you know, these Indians smell different, eat different, think different, whatever it was. Again, that whole perpetuation of that. Now, here you have a leader that has said every citizen in this country is a Fijian. People from Fiji have migrated to Australia and New Zealand. When their children are born, they have no hesitation in being called an Australian or a Kiwi. People accept it. It does not in any way mean that the Itauke land, for example, will be taken over. It does not in any way mean that the culture will be taken over. So we have had a history, a political history, of always having the boogeyman. You need one enemy, because that's how ethnicity, our politics have been predicated upon, on ethnicity or religious vilification. You know, we had, for example, the Sunday ban justification, you know, the whole issue about the Christian state. We were told, Garase put out a video prior to 2014 saying, if you vote Beni Marama in, if you support this constitution, we won't be able to pray to Jesus Christ. If you don't have a Christian state. Every single Christian in this country is praying to Jesus Christ every single day. And as the Prime Minister said, probably even more so now. Every faith-based organization is able to run their own schools. They set up their own schools. Of course, we appoint the teachers who we pay the salaries for on merit, and anybody can apply. So you see, all of this is nonsense. Niko Nawekula and Bulitavu actually went out and said in campaign, and that time even said in Parliament, that this constitution will mean the Itauke people will lose their land, they lose their culture, their identity, their language. What nonsense. Not a single inch, millimeter of land has been lost to anybody. In fact, today, 91% of all the land in Fiji is Itauke owned. And everybody respects that. The Constitution respects that. And in fact, does not allow for the permanent alienation of that land. They talk about the 1997 Constitution, the 1990 Constitution. Under those two constitutions, they permanently alienated land in Denarau, converted Itauke land to freehold land. It's gone, Saoti, finished. Permanently alienated land in Momi. When we mentioned this in Parliament, Ratu Nengama said, whoa, it was done legally. Yes, it was done legally, because the legal framework allowed for it, allowed for the permanent alienation of land, Itauke land. This constitution does not, because we recognize the fact that communally owned land is actually something that's highly, you know, precious, and it must be owned by communally owned people. It cannot go away. So, getting back to my point about, you know, you have to understand, you don't have simple answers for these things. So again, so they need to have the boogeyman, right? So now, of course, you have NFP and SODELPA working together, maybe holding hands in private, and that's what it is. If you never hear NFP, not once has NFP actually stood up and condemned openly, emphatically, what SODELPA has said. Not once. They're only criticizing our PM, criticizing FijiFirst. So now you have people wanting to have the boogeyman. They're not actually arguing on economic policies, sophisticated arguments on economic policies, none. So they say, oh, if you vote for these people, the Muslims will take over. It's very simple, you see, you can put the fear in people. So people say, oh yeah, they will take over. When we know practically the Muslims don't have any intention to take over the place,
Right.
practically they can't even do it, but they would never want to do it, they don't want to do it. So you see, this is the boogeyman syndrome, what we say, you know, it's always creating an enemy.
And there is this, there's a list going around of all the prominent Muslim men in Fiji and the positions that they hold. It involves businessmen, it has you on it, our CEO, Mr. Qayyum as well. And you're right in saying that the opposition has never openly condemned these things. Does it surprise you that they've never spoken out about racial issues?
You see, I think the one party that should is NFP.
Mm-hmm.
But you see, Biman Prasad, the leader, has been consistently inconsistent. In fact, he's very weak, practically to the point of being, you know, quite what I say, impotent. It's very interesting. You know, you have, for example, one of the candidates, the provisional candidates, was accused of rape in Papua New Guinea, withdrawn. And one of the other candidates, provisional candidates, I think I understand has been charged with rape or at least sexual assault.
Yes.
Immediately a resignation later came about. I understand he was asked to resign, accepted. One of the candidates actually has been charged now with some form of racial or religious vilification in Ba. He's still a candidate. And Biman Prasad's statement has been, oh, he's innocent till proven guilty. Why didn't he stick to the other candidate who's been charged with sexual assault? Why didn't he say innocent till proven guilty? We have raised issues with him. Everybody knows about it. It was in particular in the Fiji Sun and maybe in your media organization. I don't know about Fiji Times, but you know about Pramod Chand, allegations of him making comments against Muslims.
Right.
Biman Prasad, I understand also his lawyers issued a statement saying we will carry out an investigation and give you the results of it. Where's the results? None. You see, the reality is this, that here you have a political party that talks about, you know, its long-time existence over 50 years is built upon, you know, supposedly multiracialism. But unfortunately, that's one political party that's now using it to its advantage. And they're doing it. We know that. They'll continuously deny it. On the other hand, you have this, this other character. I always forget his name. Firoz Mohammed, right? He's trying to spin on the other end. You know, he's been making statements. In fact, I told Biman about this in Parliament when we were walking out of Parliament one day. And I said to him, I said, look, this guy is doing all this stuff, and I showed him the Viber messages. You know, he said, oh, Syed Qayyum has become a Hindu, because I go to Hindu temples, you know, and I've got the tika on my forehead.
Right.
And, you know, I showed it to him. Now he's put the other spin, he has not done anything about it. And then they say, oh, his account was hacked. He said, oh, I did not make the statement, let's do the voice verification. I mean, come on. Our Prime Minister would never allow any of our members, in fact, none of our members would do that in the first place, because we people are putting on credibility. And even if any one of them did, they'd be immediately out of the system. Because we want to build a Fiji that's based on economic discussions, sound policy decisions, not based on some type of communal distinction being made against people. People used to do this on provincial basis too before. Now, our Prime Minister does not allow that. You heard him the other day, he was in Namosi. You know, they said, yes, just because our Honourable Prime Minister is from Thailand doesn't mean all the development only happens in Thailand. That used to happen before. No, he looks after everybody.
Thank you for that. And we would like to get into some economic policies, but that's right after the break.
Well, so I'd like to talk about FijiFirst Party's manifesto. When is it coming out?
Soon.
What do you mean by soon?
Before the elections.
Well, we're right close to the elections, just a few more weeks.
Well, why don't you ask the other political parties?
Well, it seems like they're waiting for FijiFirst to take the lead.
Exactly.
Is that the case?
I don't know. You better ask them. But we're doing our own thing. As you know, that last time we released our manifesto at the right time. We already have. You see, the thing is, unlike the other political parties, we don't necessarily have any, you know, surprises. As we've said, our leaders already said this. We basically are going to build upon what we've already said. We have the foundations in place. Right? We're not going to bring in and start saying that, you know, let's put all the Western people in a different kind of box or something. You know, I mean, I'm saying it's being ridiculous. if you're going to have anything spring out of the ordinary. But the fact of the matter is we're building on our foundations. Of course, we're going to continuously improve it. I mean, for example, things like this $1,000 that we're giving for young babies, the babies that are born, for those below a particular income, $30,000 or less, we give them that ability to look after the babies. And we also create a culture of savings. It also means that we're getting people to register their babies earlier. It saves on administrative costs. So we don't actually have to keep the BDM offices open late at night just before school starts. See, these things have been thought about. It's not a freebie, as they say. I mean, I really like this, this analysis being done. People say it's freebie. It's actually not. It's part of what we call social wages. Mm-hmm. It's basically helping people relieve the burden on the day-to-day living. Other countries do it. They don't call it freebies. When you give, Australia gives housing grants. They give certain allowances when children are born. Nobody calls it freebies. They actually accept it because people at a lower socio-economic level need that level of assistance. So our manifesto is basically going to build upon that, but it's very interesting how the others are kind of waiting for it. I mean, also, for example, many of them made various announcements saying, I think NFP has said that they'll reduce VAT on 15 items. They've been saying for how many months? Where is it? Where's the 15 items? They should be bringing that onto the fore. You have SODELPA has now changed, it would appear, a number of the policies. They had some sort of a launch in Sydney, then had a semi-launch over here. We understand now there's going to be something else launched. We don't have that level of inconsistency with us.
I thought I'd ask this of you. You've mentioned that, of course, NFP has mentioned 15 items. We're not sure which ones because it hasn't been released yet. But there's some who are already talking about how FijiFirst had said that they will not be introducing VAT on certain items and how the prices for certain food items have gone up. What do you say to that?
Well, there are two separate issues. Again, you should do your research better. We never said that we said that we will keep the price of goods down, and we had said at that point in the manifesto that we'll maintain the VAT levels. We had said that. In particular on what was called those 6 items. Right? Those 6 items being, I always forget this, flour, powdered milk, tinned fish, rice, oil and tea. Right? And the other one, of course, which is not a food, is kerosene. Now, we actually did analysis. You see, this is the thought process of FijiFirst. The ultimate goal of having VAT reduction or VAT exempt items at that point in time was to ensure that we reduced or make it more affordable. Now, of course, you don't live only on flour. You don't live only on oil. You need onions, potatoes, masala, everything else. Every single food item that you buy, including your day-to-day living, your toothpaste, your toilet paper, your curry powder, your shoes, your clothes, every single thing else had VAT or has VAT. So we did analysis. So what we did was we found out we're probably one of the very few countries in the world, if not the only country in the world, that actually reduced VAT from 15% to 9%. Those 6 items, we put 9% VAT. One of the fundamental reasons why we did do that was because we found a lot of the supermarkets were playing around in the books. When you have certain items that are VAT exempt and most of the other items aren't, they actually cook the books. So they're able to not pay the right taxes. In this way, we are able to get everybody to pay the VAT, right? But the VAT came down. Now, if you look at the, we have introduced actually progressive taxation. At the same time, you see, it's not only about VAT. They don't talk about other things. $8,500, $8,600, if you earn more than that in 2007, you had to pay taxes. We then said, no, you don't pay any taxes, only if you earn $16,000 or more. Then we brought it down to $30,000. So today in Fiji, every single person that earns less than $30,000 does not pay any tax. Every single cent you get as your wages goes into your pocket. Guess what? The other thing is, you no longer actually pay the full rate of your electricity. We pay 50% of your electricity cost. We give you 90,250 litres of free water. You don't pay for school fees. You don't pay for bus fares. You don't pay for the textbooks. You get disability allowance. Pensioners get actually $40 a month for travel. Disabled people get $40 a month. The list goes on. Rural pregnant women get food vouchers. We've increased the social welfare benefits. you don't look at just, oh, VAT there. You need to look at the overall cost of your living. That's very critically important for people to understand. So they go around prancing around, saying, oh, you know, they put up the VAT. Yes, but look at the overall cost. No, that's really, see, this is the level of lack of sophistication and of the political parties, the opposition political parties. They don't go and actually explain to people. Rather than actually saying, look, this is the economic reality, this is how the system works, we will going to do this differently. They simply say, oh, they did that. You know, they don't talk about the social wages. They don't talk about the fact that it was Beni Marama who introduced minimum wage for unskilled work. There's no minimum wage before. You used to get paid, you know, $2.
While we're on that topic, so Delpa is proposing $4, NFP $5, Hope 10, and FijiLepa $3.50. We'd just like to get this clear because this seems to be the one issue that every
and we have asked that of all other political parties that have appeared on the show.
So on what basis is minimum wage calculated, and what did you take into consideration before determining the current minimum wage rate?
Okay, let me make one thing clear. There's a lot of misconception about minimum wage. When we talk about minimum wage, this whole debate about the 4, 5, 10, whatever amounts, that's about unskilled work. Okay, minimum wage for other different categories of employment is different. So if you work as a waiter or a waitress in a hotel, I think from memory the minimum wage is about $3.40 an hour. Right. The forklift driver minimum wage is different. A carpenter is different. You know, bus driver is different. A boiler maker is different. Electrician is different, and they're a lot higher than this minimum wage that we are talking about. So minimum wage for unskilled work, unskilled could be somebody comes and cuts the grass at your house. Or somebody say, oh, can you please dig that hole for me? I want to put some, you know, poles there. That's what we call unskilled work. You don't actually need some form of qualification. Or what we call, unfortunately in Fiji, house girls. Right? So the Beni Marama government introduced that, $2 minimum wage. Then it went up to $2.32. Then it went up to $2.68. Now how was that done? We have an independent person who comes and does the assessment, looks at things like social wages, looks at the economic potential, looks at things like impact on jobs and creation of jobs or loss of jobs. So that's how it's done. Now what we have done, we've continuously reviewed it. As announced in the budget, what we have said is this: we need to do another review, but a thorough review, taking into account every other hourly paid worker. You know, the boiler maker, forklift driver. Can you imagine for a moment, and I've got 2 points to make, please don't interrupt me. 2 points to make. Can you imagine of somebody who, for example, is unskilled, and tomorrow we say to them, we'll pay them $5. Right? A lady who may be currently working somewhere, and she's say getting paid $6 an hour at the moment, because she's got some form of qualification. She's getting paid $6. Now she's got a young child, and she needs somebody to look after and clean the house. Now, if we say we want to pay this, what we call, like I say, unfortunately, house girl or house help, I'd rather call them house help. If we pay this house help from tomorrow $5 an hour, minimum wage, that is 8 hours a day, $40 a day, $200 a week, right? Normally, most people who work in your house as house help, you give them breakfast, you give them lunch, you give them dinner. Some of them actually stay in your house. You don't even charge them rent. All of that needs to be factored in, for example, if you pay them $5. This lady who's now earning $6 an hour, do you think she's going to go and work when she has to pay somebody else $5 an hour? She's only making a $1 profit, because she's getting paid $6 an hour, but she has to pay a house help $5 an hour. She'd rather stay home because she also has to, you know, factor in her cost to go to work, etc. So there could potentially be a job loss there, and her not taking up that employment. Now, the other point, of course, is this: if she is getting $6 an hour, she will say, no, hang on, I went to a technical college and I got a certificate. I actually have, I paid fees. So if this unskilled person is getting $5 an hour, and she's now had a pay rise from $2.68 to $5 an hour, which is almost double, I want my salary to go from $6 an hour to $12 an hour. It has what you call a spiraling effect. Let me make 2 points. Linda Tambuya said at USP, at some lecture she gave, when she said they'll pay $4 an hour, she said, we understand it may affect small businesses, we'll subsidize these businesses. How are you going to subsidize them? What's going to be the cost of that on the budget?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of impact will it have on the deficit? You see, none of the opposition parties actually prepare a budget. They're saying whatever they like at the moment. You go to Australia, when they go into elections, the opposition's budget is actually affected, it's costed. So you know what will be the budget deficit. A week ago, it was revealed in the Fiji Sun. In email correspondence with a businesswoman, Biman Prasad said that he's going to progressively introduce the $5 an hour.
Right.
When she said that it may lead to job losses. She won't be able to pay everybody $5 an hour. He said, no, don't worry, we'll progressively introduce it. After his question, he's not responded to that. You see, the cat's out of the bag. And that's precisely what we have been saying. We have been saying, look, people deserve wage rises, right? We need to be able to do it properly, though. Let's not do so on a national basis if it's going to create job insecurity, if it's going to mean job losses. My other thing that we said last night too, there's quite a few business people in NFP. We challenge them to start paying their workers, unskilled workers, $5 an hour now.
That's an interesting point, but we would like to discuss that more right after the break. So right before the break, we were discussing minimum wage. Mr. Prasad of the NFP, he implies that he is the better authority on the economy and the cost of living because he's a professor and he's an economist. He's a published economist, he's an academic. So what makes your analysis of the cost of living correct and his incorrect?
Because we have a lot of experts that actually give us advice, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have the Reserve Bank of Fiji, we have IMF, we have World Bank, Asian Development Bank, etc. We work with them too. Just because somebody is a professor in economics does not necessarily give him the sort of right financial nous to be able to run budgetary processes. Mm-hmm. One can argue sometimes that academics are people who are very much based on theory. I remember a few years ago he talked about that import substitution never works. And we should allow, for example, all these milk products to come into Fiji because we are not very good at producing milk. And let's allow all the milk to come in from Australia, New Zealand, wherever it is. Mm-hmm. No, but as a government, we of course are concerned about dairy farmers in Fiji. They need to be given a particular level of protection too, because you need to ensure strategically we have food security. Mm-hmm. And he's on record for saying that import substitution does not work. And that's when, at that point in time, that's what he said. Obviously, that's changed now because he's now giving another spin on that story. So, I mean, the reality is that the 9 years has proven that our policies are working. And that 9 years has also meant that we now have a far greater rate of private sector investment as a percentage of our GDP. Mm-hmm. The private sector does its own analysis. If they weren't confident in the policies, if they weren't confident in the consistency in the policies and the financial and economic environment, they would never invest. And they have invested.
While we're still on minimum wage, you made an interesting comment that a lot of these parties are associated with big businesses and prominent business people, yet there's no evidence showing that any of these people pay their employees more than $2.68 an hour. What's stopping these businesses from paying more?
You should ask them. You should ask them. I mean, I did not say big business. I said they have business people. One of the big-time hardcore supporters of Sodelpa runs a security company. Mm-hmm. They're paying their security personnel $2.40 an hour. Now, this is the same party that's going around saying we'll pay $4 minimum wage. But one of their own supporters is paying $2.40 an hour. So, you see, again, there's a huge level of hypocrisy. And the voters, I'll bring it back to the voters, they should understand that these people are essentially what we call spinning it, just to get their votes. That's all that they're doing. There is no sound economic analysis to it, frankly, none whatsoever. The numerous studies have shown that if you have spiraling salary wage commitments, it has an enormous adverse impact on the economy. They do know that. But they are not necessarily wanting to acknowledge it because they think it's something that sounds very sweet to the ears. So people say, yes, it's okay, $5 an hour, great. But what about the other things? What will be the impact on jobs? What will be the impact on the financial impact on the economy? What will be the financial impact on things like all these, what they call the freebies, what we call the socio-economic safety net we've created for people below a particular income level? What will happen to that? In the same way, for example, the level of contradiction is quite phenomenal. On one hand, they say, we will represent the youth. Then on the other hand, because they want the civil servant vote, they're going, we'll increase the retirement age to 60. They simply want their vote. In the same way, they want the vote of those trucking company owners because they say you can carry whatever load you like. There's no rhyme or reason. It's that whoever comes to you, say, don't worry, I'll give that to you. Yeah, don't worry, I'll give that to you. By the way, these people are taking over. By the way, land is going to go, finish. That's all there is. Look at the policies. There's nothing stable about it. There's nothing secure about it. There's no logic behind it. There's no economic sense behind it.
So let's move the discussion to the Health Ministry for now.
Well, before we move on to that, I think Mr. Syed Qayyum touched a very good point about civil service reforms. Now, the FijiFirst government had introduced civil service reforms, and some were saying that it was a little too sudden, that they didn't have time to absorb it all. And there are parties, especially the NFP, that is promising fixed-term contracts for civil service employees. What do you think is going to happen if that does come into effect?
No, I think you've got that wrong. They're not saying fixed-term contracts. They're saying they won't have contracts. They'll basically they'll have a job for life,
yes,
essentially,
job for life.
Until you retire. Now, we've given contracts. We're saying we must have contracts. In fact, before the civil service reforms, almost 70% of the civil servants were on contracts in any case. You see, they don't mention this. What they also don't mention is that many civil servants, in particular those that actually have high demanding jobs, have received substantial pay rises. They're not mentioning that at all. There are different components to the civil service reform. One of them, of course, is looking at the salary structure. One of them is looking at the working environment that they live in. The other one is, for example, the structure of the ministries themselves. For example, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Agriculture, most of the structures that they have, you have a divisional education officer, a sub-divisional education officer, etc., 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 very archaic, very colonial, very hierarchical. We don't need that kind of structure now. So we need to reform that. The people, for example, who run the curriculum department, people who run the asset management unit, most of them are former teachers. They're not specialists in those areas. If you want to be a modern civil service, you need to get the right people in place. Now you see, on one hand, for example, they talk about the point that I actually missed out on earlier on. They talk about youth empowerment, but because they want to get a civil servant vote, they say we'll make it retirement age to 60. What about those young people? 50% of the population is below the age of 27. I'm telling the youth of this country, look at what they are saying. They're actually going to deprive you of a job. They're going to minimize the job opportunities that you're going to have, because at the moment they're going for the civil servants vote. In the same way, if I can digress slightly, we are the ones who introduced, for example, scholarships based on merit. Now 970 scholarships, about 70% of the scholarships are given in the sort of science areas, non-accounting, economics, law areas. Now, then we've introduced TELS. So then they said, when we come in, we'll make education free. So Delpa was saying, university will be free too. Then after a few months, they realized how much it's going to cost. Now they're backtracking. In the budget, we announced that those people who have TELS loans, you only pay, this has been there for quite some time, you only pay 20% of your gross salary once you get a job. And that it can mean 10, 15 years payment. What we are saying now in the accelerated repayment system, if you pay 50% of your debt within 3 to 6 years' time, we'll actually write off the other 50% because we want the money quickly so we can pay for all the other young people that are coming on board, that are going to university. We need to have sustainability of policies. And one thing you have to remember, when we put in a policy, it's going to last. We're not going to switch it off 3, 4 years later down the track and say, oh, there's no money. When we introduce that, now we hear NFP saying, because they want to be different, you see. We'll make first year of university free, but second, third year you have to pay. And some other stuff they've come up with. Why are they doing that? Because they want the university students to vote for them. They're not talking about primary school and secondary school. We spend a lot of our time talking about primary, secondary school. They don't talk about them because they are young people. They're below the age of 18. They don't vote. So people need to understand what is happening. So in the civil service reforms, what we're doing is with the restructuring, it has not been rushed through. In fact, we believe that it was very slow. There was resistance in some of the ministries, like Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Education. You know, the civil servants who were there for quite some time did not want OMRS. They said, oh no, we don't want OMRS. We can choose our people the way we've been doing so. It must be given on the fact that because, for example, if he's been there for 20 years and you apply, you've been there for 8 years, even though he may be spending 3/4 of his time in the grog bowl, he'll get the promotion. Because he's been there 20 years, you've only been there 8 years. Even though you may be working 3 times as hard as him, better qualified as him, you won't get the promotion. So what will you do as a young person? You'll get disenchanted, you'll leave. You may join some other organization out of government, or you might migrate. That's what's been happening. What we are saying, we need to recognize people who actually are doing the job, qualifications, who can contribute. So that's part and parcel of the civil service reforms also.
So generally in terms of public sector reform, in the next 4 years, if you enter into government again, what plans do you have for public sector reform?
You see, part and parcel of this, like I said, is the restructure of some of the ministries. But also we need to give our people the right tools. You know, part and parcel of that is, for example, very basic things like we are fixing up, for example, teachers' quarters. Some teachers' quarters continuously need to be upgraded. I mean, we have a very unique situation in Fiji where many of the schools, in fact, majority of the schools in Fiji that are run, they're not actually owned by government. They are run by faith-based organizations or what we call school committee, management committees. They run it. You know, so we work with them. Some of them actually, when they had a bit of money, they made us staff quarters, and then it may be run down now. They have not had the money. Of course, now we're giving free education. We have to go and rebuild this. So we have to provide the right work environment in the office, right tools. We need to provide training, as we already announced. We've now announced, for example, civil service scholarships. Teachers who have diplomas to give them degrees, those who have degrees to get masters. And there's actually 10 scholarships for PhD. So, you know, a continuous career development, consistency in salary improvement. We now have what we call performance management systems. So you get continuously assessed on your performance and you get recognized. So if both of you actually work in one office, you perform better, you should get a better, you know, recognition for it, a bonus or what have you. That's the system that we've introduced. And of course, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of restructuring, realignment. You know, for example, now waterways sits a lot better with the environment, goes a lot, you know, works a lot better. For example, we created the Ministry of Housing and Community Development. We brought in, for example, before some of the squatter development budget was with Ministry of Lands, some was with rural development in terms of housing projects, some was with local governments. We brought it now under, and some was with housing, all under housing. So that's kind of restructuring, the streamlining. One other critical feature, of course, is the digitization of government services. We're working with the Singaporeans. As you know, there's quite a few things that we're doing, and of course we'll roll that out too.
Thank you for that explanation.
So I had that look, you had the look on your face, you wanted me to stop, so that's why I stopped.
Yes, we did. We'll be right back after the break. So over the past 4 years, the FijiFirst government has built a certain number of health centers, clinics, hospitals around Fiji in order to, as you say, decentralize health services around the country. A lot of politicians, and this health has become a major campaign point for a lot of the parties, who are now saying that there are various flaws in our hospitals. They're saying, look at the condition of our hospitals, they are understaffed. Do you agree with these criticisms?
There are a number of issues within the health system that has been substantially addressed by the FijiFirst government. If you go to many of the hospitals today, you'll find that the level of infrastructure, the equipment, and indeed the staffing has improved tremendously. We are, of course, a developing country that has had a legacy of neglect in the health center, health services. Classic example, and I've said this before publicly. If today any one of us sitting here, God forbid, has a heart attack, there's not a single Fijian doctor that can carry out open heart surgery in Fiji. Not one single doctor. It's not the fault of the FijiFirst government or the Bainimarama government. It's the fault of previous governments that have not invested in our people. A few years ago, we gave our doctors an 80% pay rise. They've had another pay rise again. We've now allowed people, for example, who come in from lecturing at FNU to actually come and also do surgery, do consultancy work, locum work. We've now allowed private sector people to come and act as locums at peak periods in our hospitals. Now, the lack of neglect is quite substantial. So we need to train our doctors. Now, to become an open heart surgery, just because I've done an MBBS doesn't mean I become an open heart surgeon. It takes 10, 15 years, as some people would say, to actually become an open heart surgeon. You need the level of experience and the level, high level of procedures to actually go through to become very good at it. Now, we have said that government, for example, to address that issue and many other procedures that are currently unavailable in Fiji, because of the lack of human capacity, infrastructure in that area, human resources capacity, and also in terms of some of the technical expertise, is that we're going to have a public-private partnership. Now, as I mentioned a couple of days ago, again, you see, these things are being very politicized. When we mentioned about the public-private partnership, we actually went and met all the staff at Lautoka Hospital, all the staff that were available on that day. A lot of them turned up. Nurses, doctors, various other people, ancillary health workers, and then also in Bath. All very supportive of it. And continuous, communication with them. Just a few days ago, the Nursing Association said, oh, why are they privatizing it? We're not privatizing it. It will be bad for us, bad for the health system. One of the conditions of having this public-private partnership is that they must have 24/7 availability of open heart surgery. We must have radiation therapy available, full chemotherapy available, oncology available, a new wing being set up where they'll have to set up new theatres, operating theatres, with a viewing area so our doctors can watch and learn and become faster experts and specialists in those areas. This new level of service will be provided to our medical system. We're building a hospital in Kayasi, up in Nanoga, up in the hills. They'll have x-ray machines. They'll do basic procedures, surgeries there. So you see, a number of things have been done. Of course, there's been lack of personnel because of the lack of investment in our human capital. And we need to attract more people. We need more people to stay. Many good doctors in Fiji have left because of the inability for them to get progression. Because people weren't appointed on merit. People were appointed based on who you knew, ethnicity, how chummy you were, what old school you went to together. Now under OMRS, that does not happen. So it gives people confidence. People who are professionals, they rely on the system, so they'll stay within the system.
Right.
Well, okay, thank you for that. I'd like to address something that you had mentioned very briefly earlier on about the dairy industry. There's a particular political party that is known to be campaigning around the issue, saying that the dairy industry is in shambles. And
NFP.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Selling off Rewa Dairy was a bad idea, it was a bad decision, and that is what's causing the dairy industry in Fiji to die. Do you agree with that sentiment?
That's actually not backed by facts. You see, it's one thing to make a statement. Rewa Dairy, as it was known then, was a loss-making proposition. It was not making any money. Enormous levels of corruption. I've got a receipt sitting in my drawer in my office. One of the former CEOs bought a Rolex watch from the money from Rewa Dairy, from one of the well-known companies that owns one of the media organizations. Now, bought stuff from them. Now, the fact of the matter is that it was not run properly. It had huge levels of debt. We actually restructured the balance sheet. We actually were able to sell the company. They were able to take the debt that was sitting there, I think from, it was over $10 million from memory. And they've now turned it around. The farmers are getting a higher price, farm gate price. We're now working with the New Zealand government. If the New Zealand government thought the dairy industry was in shambles, they would not be working with the Minister of Agriculture to improve the dairy industry. They would not be doing so. So you see, all of this is one big hoax as far as we are concerned, all the statements being made. They have a political inclination because they don't like the company that actually bought it. Because they believe that that company actually got the company because of so-called political proclivities, etc. It was an open tender process. Everybody bid for it. Now they've gone on about so-called protection for this company. The protection will end in the next couple of years' time. The fact is, the reality is now that we have more confidence in the dairy industry than ever before. What was the dairy industry like before that? They're not talking about that. They're not talking about the farm gate price. So you see, again, unfortunately, you see, for parties like NFP and also SODELPA to an extent, they've grabbed hold of one idea. Now, and they took a particular position because it sounded good at that point in time. Now they cannot extricate themselves from that position. So come what may, come the facts that may fly in the face of what they're saying, they'll continue to say that. I heard that one of the political parties and one of the, I think the other radio station, radio company, even though he said, oh, the debt in Fiji is $8 billion. Well,
Right.
the debt is clearly about $5.1, $5.2 billion.
Yes.
And he said, despite this, no, I don't believe the statistics. Does not make sense. You see? So what they've done, they're trying to create their own reality, trying to create their own truth, which is completely built on a foundation of false.
So as with the dairy industry, politicians also like to discuss the sugar industry and the way that it's struggling. People say, well, these politicians are saying that the sugar industry is the worst that it's ever been in Fiji's history. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely not. You see, again, you know, the other day, these people were actively, directly or indirectly, campaigning against Fiji's bid for the Human Rights Council. Right. Now, when we actually now got to the council, we had the second highest votes in the UN. One vote shy of, short of India. Now, then Bhiman Prasad came out and said, well, congratulations to Fiji, but we want an investigation about all the human rights abuses for the past 12 years. And the Honourable Prime Minister said this in the public meetings. He did not go beyond 2007. What about the human rights abuses in 2000? What happened to the women in Mueneweni, in Draketi? What about the abuse in 1987? When we said this in Parliament, they made fun of it. You see, so their analysis is very selective. It's very political. Bhiman Prasad's analysis is very political. Same thing with the sugar industry. They don't talk about the fact that people like Niko Nawaikula was at TLTB, at that time known as NLTB, when him and the other gentleman who was there, Garikau,
Right.
actively went to landowners telling them not to renew leases for political reasons. Those, if it was not going to be renewed because it's going to be used for some other productive, use capacity, it would have been great. Would have been great. There's the landowners, is a choice.
Right.
But those lands are lying empty. Fellow, sugarcane production in Lambasa or Vanuatu halved. Halved. That's why so many people in Lambasa are living between Suva and Osori corridor. So you see, they don't talk about that. They say it's the worst it's ever been. There were 20,000 registered farmers in there, 22,000 registered cane farmers at that point in time.
If I could
So-
interject,
Yes.
we'd like to continue this point of discussion right after this break.
Oh.
Let's talk about the $100 per ton that the NFP is promising compared to your $85 per ton with subsidies. Which policy is better and why?
So as I was saying, sugarcane production halved, right, in Vanuatu. Now, so a lot of farmers left the land. Now, what we have done in the past few years, obviously, is trying to gain back the confidence of sugarcane farmers. What they don't talk about is the fact that the sugarcane industry, the farming industry actually, has a number of own internal issues. For example, there's an aging population. Not many young people actually want to stay in cane farms. We have very small farmer holdings. There's changes in demographics. But also at the same time, there's been very low rate or uptake of mechanization in the sugarcane industry. Very manual based. So of course, under this government, we have the highest rate of mechanization. You go around now in the harvesting season, you see so many harvesters. We actually fund harvesters, a third of that. The loans are arranged through FDB. We give $90,000 towards about $300,000 purchase of a cane harvester. Various other mechanization incentives we have. We now, for the first time in Fiji's history, farmers are getting subsidies on weedicide and pesticides. Higher rate of fertilization subsidy. And of course, various other systems like new cane planting, new cane farmers, etc. All of these introductions have been put in place, essentially to give that assistance to sugarcane farmers. Now, it's very attractive. It's like the $5 an hour. It sounds very sweet. So somebody says, I'll give you $100 a ton. They're not talking about the input cost. That's the end price. If it's going to cost you $90 to produce that cane of ton and you're going to get $100, you're making a $10 profit. If you're going to get $85 a ton, and with the subsidies, your cost of production is $60. What's better? The $85 or the $100? Farmers know this, cane farmers know this. Now, the other point also is very critically important, which they don't go around talking about, is that we no longer have the subsidy and the quota that we used to get from the EU. We're now subject to world market price. It's not just Fiji, all other countries that used to trade with the European Union. Because the Cotonou agreement is gone, and the economic partnership agreement, etc. Now, so we've said we'll stabilize the price at 85. So the cane farmers know for the next 3 years, cane farmers will receive $85 a ton, come what may. So if FSC, for example, sells the sugar the next time around at $70 a ton, that's the price they get in world market price, they'll still pay the farmers $85 a ton. If the following year they get $95 a ton, they'll still pay the cane farmers $85 a ton. The balance of the $10 will go into the stabilization fund. So FSC has sold some of his assets, going to put into a pool of money. And that will act as what we call the stabilization fund. Government said they'll participate with them too. So the other point, of course, that is very critically important, you need land to grow the sugarcane. You need tenure. You need longevity of tenure. In other words, long-term leases. So if you get longevity of leases, and government is encouraging now, the laws are such, you can get up to 99-year leases. If farmers get 99-year leases, they'll feel a lot more confident. Commercial banks will lend to them. They can, even further upskill and further mechanize their farms. So we believe the future is quite bright. We believe that we are able to tackle some of the deep systemic issues. I mean, if you look at those mills prior to 2007, I mean, they were like Charles Dickens, something out of Charles Dickens' novel. I mean, if you go into those mills, they're in terrible condition. Never been upgraded substantially. And so now we're trying to improve that. We have a very good CEO. We've got Chairman Vishnu Mohan, who is, dealt with commodities, former banker. We've got good professional people sitting on the board. We've got Graham Clark, who's the CEO. These are good professional people. People have been appointed on merit to tackle some of the substantial issues. And look at even things like we brought in the Indians. The Indians have been brought in to look at the railway system. We have something like over 700 kilometers of rail tracks. Only about 400 kilometers of rail tracks are currently being used. Everybody knows, or people who want to tell the truth, that it's cheaper to cart cane by rail to the mill than by truck. So we are going to actually improve that, working with the Indians to ensure that we get more rail by truck, more cane by rail, and even use those rail system for passenger carriage.
Well, Mr. Syed Qayyum, here's the thing, this is a final segment of the show, and in the interest of time, I can understand there are various other issues that we'd like to cover, but since we're right at the, towards the end line rather, elections looming right around the corner, I was hoping to actually get an answer maybe this time around. Around when can we expect a manifesto from FijiFirst? And if we do, if you say soon, then what are the highlights, or what can Fijians expect in that?
We'll be building upon the foundations that we've already put in place.
That's your final answer for that?
Yes.
All right then. Well, what can Fijians expect leading into the 2018 elections? So far there have been not too many troubled waters. It seems as though FijiFirst is working pretty much like a well-oiled machine. Other political parties in comparison, there seems to be certain sections, certain factions where there's disagreement happening within there.
Well, that's precisely the point. See, that's precisely the point. FijiFirst is a stable party, stable leadership, sound leadership. And when you have a party that's stable, and when you have a party that does not lie to win people's votes, then you expect a stable government. You expect a transparent government. A government is going to be frank, and is going to be transparent with the citizens of this country.
Well, another elections trend that we've seen this year is that there may be factions within parties, but all parties generally are united, but they're not united for a cause, they're united against the FijiFirst. So the narrative generally is that you can vote for any party, just don't vote for FijiFirst, right? Why do you think that is, and do you think that these parties will enter into a coalition after the election?
Well, I can't speak for them as to what they will do, only God knows. But all I can say is that it would appear that you're absolutely right. They're united in their, in their effort against FijiFirst, but without any substantial reason. I think a lot of the politicians from the political parties like SODELPA and NFP at the last run. A lot of them know that if they don't win government, if they don't get some kind of substantial positioning in parliament, this is the end of their political careers, and that's how many of them see it. So they'll get more desperate. The lies will get more desperate. The theories will get even more fanciful. So the people of Fiji need to be wary of these people. These people will do anything to maintain their political survival. Whereas we actually are motivated not by personal aggrandizement, not by personal political survival, but our entire focus is, how will Fiji do? What's the future of our country? We need to have a very strong country, a country that will be, the government that will be compassionate, a country that needs to think smarter. We live in a globalized world. And we have these people saying, oh, the PM should not be focused on climate change. Come and deal with the issues at home. I mean, what utter nonsense. Anybody who knows anything about climate change, would know what he did is substantive.
Right.
Right. No, so my point is that the Fijian voters must realize that what FijiFirst is offering is a much brighter future, a much prosperous future, and a very stable future.
Just building on that, since we're nearing the end of our show, and this will, of course, be for anyone who hasn't made up their mind yet. What do you say your government, why do you say that your government can achieve the things that you've spoken about and achieve plans and results? And why is FijiFirst leadership better than all other parties?
Our track record speaks for itself. We've managed to do so many things in such a short period of time. Even things like, I gave the example of mobile phones. Nobody ever thought that monopolies would be, many people don't know they were monopolies. Monopolies would be removed. I mean, you look at the infrastructure development that's taken place, the fact that we have free education now and are able to afford it, the many development policies that have been put in place, the ability of people to access those services is phenomenal. And that's the point. And what is also critically important, the leadership is very important. Because we have a leadership that is very much focused on development, very much focused on enhancing the socio-economic rights of people, and having a lot more open society. Today, people in Fiji, contrary to what the opposition tries to portray offshore and onshore, today people in Fiji are talking about issues they never talked about openly. People don't realize that. So the opposition has this spin, oh, nobody's free to discuss, people are feeling frightened, media is under threat. Who is under threat? Nobody's under threat. I mean, in fact, if anything, our political billboards are getting attacked, defaced. We got our office tried to be broken into. That's the level of thuggery and lawlessness you'll find with these people. So I think the choice is very simple. The choice is FijiFirst. If you want your country to be progressively moving on, we have an inclusive society, a very decisive and strong leadership, a compassionate leadership.
I've got two final questions for you, sir, just as we're about to round off this particular program. Of course, no political party is going to enter into elections thinking that they're going to have to form a coalition. Everyone wants to win on the basis of majority, but just in case, if FijiFirst does not win by majority, do you see FijiFirst forming a coalition, and if so, with who?
We believe that we won't need to form a coalition with anybody, because we believe that we will win majority of the seats.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But in the off chance that you did need to form a coalition?
The Honourable Prime Minister has already said this, that there's none of the opposition political parties have the same values and principles and adherence to a compassionate Fiji like we do.
Well, before we wrap things up on the show, we'd just like to thank you for your time, for coming onto the show, and in the lead up to elections, we would like to have you on board, or maybe the leader of FijiFirst, maybe to participate in a debate or maybe a panel discussion in the lead up to elections. Would that be possible?
We look forward to an invitation from you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much, and we wish FijiFirst all the best in your campaigns. That's all we have for you tonight. Join us again next week as we speak with more political candidates in the lead up to the elections.